So, the average RotMG player might know the dungeon, the Shatters. Introduced back in 2013, this dungeon really took the community by storm. I remember checking the leaderboard when the dungeon was just released, and I just saw those fame farmers dying to ice adepts and ice spheres. And it really came to show how much of an endgame dungeon this was back then. Now it's of course seen as almost nothing. I mean, it's a lethal dungeon if you don't watch out, but it's nothing compared to the Lost Halls. So I thought it would be interesting to take a look back at when the dungeon was being pitched to the developer team. So I went to the Wild Shadow web archive and found LordShon's original post. So I tried to visually represent the dungeon as good as I could in Photoshop to kind of show you how the dungeon would look like and how the mechanics were and what items dropped. So without further ado, I'm gonna leave some small timestamps on screen if you just want to go to the loot or the layout itself or the minions, but the whole video is just gonna flow together into one mess, so I recommend you to watch it in an entire sitting. Okay, where do you start? Well, let's just start with the layout. So as of now, you're probably all familiar with the original Shatters dungeon. It looks like this. And if you're not familiar with it, I can recommend watching G8CD's guide on it. But I'll go ahead and assume that you know the dungeon. So this is what I interpreted the old one to be. So let's go through this dungeon one step at a time. So, the first thing we see is that this dungeon was supposed to drop from the Lord of the Lost Lands with twice a low drop chance of the tomb. The lowest sprite you see is the dungeon being locked, because this dungeon was locked for the first 10 seconds it spawned. It would let out the mysterious portal appears, emitting waves of ancient energy all over the realm, and a dot on the map would appear so that everyone could see it. Here's a sample of what the gameplay would look like. And as you can see, the rooms are more meant as to overgrown stone brick castle rooms. Rooms were also separated by large high health walls that you could destroy, like in Oryx Castle. When as of now you have to destroy those statues to get through. And also, the whole place is a fucking garden. I mean, the first room. But we have no idea as of to what the start room would be. Moving on to the second part of this dungeon, which sort of remains the same, the bridge. If you want to know how the whole boss battle could go, just go to the link in the description. But to sum it up, the Forgotten Sentinel, or back then called the Bridge Sentinel, would stand in the middle, and if disturbed, would be activated. It would have some certain chase phases and would stand in the middle and not on the side. It would also spawn those Paladin obelisks and some Titanum, those green trees that shoot out large laser beams. The only interesting part of this battle, I think, would be that the Sentinel moves. But that's all I can say. And now the drops stats I will go through later, but all that you need to know is that there's a 0.1% chance of getting a white bag and 15% of getting the garbage, trash of this dungeon. Now as of to part 2 of this dungeon, I'm rather unsure how the design is. It's only mentioned that there's a lot of rooms in between, and there's those walls, and you get a bunch of more enemies. We'll just have a quick walkthrough of them now. Why not? So the enemies themselves have decent HP and decent defense, but not that impressive. Enemies on the left are the ones you'll encounter up till the bridge, and post-bridge you'll see those 3 new enemies. Compare this to the 2019 Shatter stats and you will see a huge difference. The mobs are way more difficult with almost 3 times as much HP. The damage they do themselves haven't changed that much, so it was still lethal to fuck up. All that aside, the corridor itself you would have to go to get to the gates would feature walls with about 100,000 HP and 50 defense each. There would also be a guardian standing in between, but I couldn't find a sprite for it. So for the boss itself, the Twilight Archmage would be disturbed and therefore activated. In some of his phases he would shotgun and spawn enemies and all that kind of crap. Once again, I'll refer to the document if you want some more knowledge on that. The Archmage himself would present some decent drop rates too and some items, but I'll showcase them later. Once you defeat the Archmage, you go into the throne room, a very large hall with 9 pillars. The area is completely filled with vegetation, and in the middle you see this stone statue of the Forgotten King. The king has 150,000 HP, but you can only hurt him 2 to 3 times per phase. He will be disturbed by shooting at him or just walking towards him, and he will activate. The royal guardians around him will activate in his first phase, and they will start chasing you with deadly shotguns. The guardians have about 25,000 health, And if you don't kill them by 25 seconds, they'll go back to the middle, regain all their health, and go back at you. The boss fight itself afterwards is sort of weird since the king will be chasing you himself. He'll fire a huge shotgun towards you that you just have to avoid. When he's down to 15,000 HP, he will go into his rage mode where he will be growing larger, shooting faster, and moving quicker. When the king dies, he shoots out 8 giant darkness stars in a circle. And so will the Royal Guardians too. Since in his rage mode he spawned 5 Archmages and 5 Royal Guardians. So the fight itself is, well, it's difficult. There's no tentacle phase, but it's difficult. In his invulnerable state, he will also spawn Paladin Obelisks and Titanums, and it would be just a clusterfuck of everything you've seen in the dungeon so far. Question is if it was worth it. And it probably is, since there's almost a guarantee you'll get a white back. Now when we've gone through this whole dungeon, let's take a look at what the items has to offer stat-wise. So, we're only interested in the white bags and the items with interesting stats, to be honest. So let's start with the Bridge Sentinel drops. The Knight set looks really cool, but also an inspiration towards some items that might appear later in the game. It gives you a total of 150 health and 30 vitality, which is what the current Lost Halls Paladin set gives. So it is alright. It has an average damage of about 25 lower than the Acclaim, but it shoots faster and gives you 4 vitality. The Fame bonus at that time was also one of the highest in the game. The shield is one to really boost your stats with 8 plus vitality and 50 HP. It also stuns for 0.5 seconds more than the Colossus, but its damage is a little lower. The Holy Breastplate gives you the same benefits as the Breastplate of Holy Life, but just with more defense and less hit points. All in all, a really good breastplate, to be honest. And last but not least, the Amulet of Vitality, which is basically the Amulet of Drakefire, but with vitality. This set, the sprites are really cool. The breastplate could need a rework, but that's it. Now for the Twilight drops, we don't have a full set. There's the mana boosting Mantle of the Immortal with really high defense for a robe. Bear in mind that back then, those unique abilities we have now for certain items didn't exist or were even experimented on, which is why these items could lack color, you know. The Prism also seemed to inspire the brain of the Golem, whereas the decoy spawns at the cursor instead of the player. It's a really useful feature, but it could be just a tiny bit overpowered that you can just point your cursor anywhere on the screen to spawn a decoy, which is why I think they adjusted the brain of the Golem after that. The Archer set is the last we'll talk about, the Forgotten set, you could call it, which has a 5% drop chance from the Forgotten King. The bow is decent, 55 average damage compared to the tier 11 bow with 57.5, although it has 4 shots with a split angle of 15 degrees. The range is, well, short, but it gives you 4 wisdom. There's the Quiver of Galactic Impact that armor breaks your target, which is cool. It doesn't seem to penetrate either, but it gives you 5 dexterity and 8 wisdom. This set is mainly focused on mana and wisdom, which makes sense when you see this quiver. The armor, once again, gives you some HP, some wisdom for the set itself, and 16 defense, which is just below the Hydra. True to its theme, this Amulet of Defense gives you defense, but it also gives you 100 HP, so it's like a huge upgrade from an Exalted Defense, if that's what you wanted. And back then, Exalted Defense and Extra HP were some of the best rings out there. I'm pretty sure the highest tier of ring you could get back then was tier 5. So what's your opinion on this dungeon overall? The dungeon represented in these documents. When I say document, I mean the post, by the way. He got so positive response from the community. Lots of people thought that, holy shit, the devs must see this and they must implement this dungeon into the game. And we all know what happened to the Shatters. It never debuted. So please, go show me some love in the comment section, because this guy kickstarted the whole end game of RotMG. I appreciate that. So, next video is going to be about the Obsidian Summit, an old scrapped idea from 2017. And after that we'll look into even more early release stuff, because I'll try to make some private server stuff work and try to test these items, which is going to be lit. Just finished my exams this week, so I should have the time for it. So I guess this is the end of the video. If you thought I missed something, go check down below in the documents to confirm your beliefs and just send it to me on Discord. Yeah, see you later. And as always, stay boneless. Can't believe I still haven't got a catchphrase.